Imagine being handed a blank check to fix one of the most beloved institutions in your country. £12 billion, enough to build dozens of new hospitals, hire tens of thousands of nurses, or fund cutting-edge treatment for years, and imagine spending almost all of it, over nearly a decade, on a single project meant to drag healthcare into the modern age. And then imagine, at the end of it all, having almost nothing to show for it. No revolutionary system, no transformed hospitals. A project so troubled, it was quietly switched off. Written up by the country's own spending watchdog as one of the worst and most expensive failures the government had ever produced.
I feel terrible for anybody who has to go through that.
Do you apologise to the
Yes,
family?
of course. And to anybody who gets service from the NHS that isn't up to the standard that they should expect.
This was not a small experiment that went wrong. At the time, it was described as the largest civilian information technology project on the planet. The ambition was breathtaking, the budget was enormous, and the people behind it were certain it would work. It did not. And the most chilling part is that the warning signs were there from almost the very beginning, flashing red, pointed out by doctors and experts year after year. And still the spending continued. So how does the country that invented the modern computer manage to pour £12 billion into a healthcare system that, in the end, barely functioned? And why could nobody stop it? Stay with me, because this is not really a story about computers at all. This is the NHS National Programme for IT. To understand the scale of what was being attempted, picture the size of the thing. This was not a system for one hospital or one city. It was meant to link tens of thousands of family doctors to hundreds of hospitals and to hold the private medical records of an entire nation, tens of millions of people, in one connected web. Nothing like it had ever been built anywhere in the world. The planners knew that. They were proud of it. What they did not seem to fully grasp was that being the biggest project of its kind on Earth is not only a boast, it is also a warning.
There are only a couple of weeks left until the end of the financial year, and yet still no mention of a settlement for the health service or social care.
Here is the thing you have to understand before any of the money makes sense. This is not a story about technology being difficult, although it is. It is a story about what happens when a small group of powerful people sitting at the very top decide they know best and try to force an enormous, complicated, deeply human system to do exactly what they say, whether it wants to or not. And it begins, as these stories so often do, with a genuinely brilliant idea. The year was 2002. The National Health Service, Britain's vast, treasured, and famously creaking public health system, had a very real problem. Its record-keeping was stuck in the past. Patient notes were still largely kept on paper, in folders, in filing cabinets, in thousands of separate hospitals and doctors' surgeries that often could not talk to one another. If you were rushed to a hospital far from home, the doctors treating you might have no way of seeing your medical history. It was slow, it was risky, and in an age of computers, it felt absurd. So the government set out to fix it. With a plan of extraordinary ambition, they would build a single unified electronic system for the entire NHS in England. Every patient would have one digital care record, accessible securely by any authorized doctor or nurse anywhere in the country. It would connect tens of thousands of family doctors to hundreds of hospitals. It would include electronic appointment booking, digital scans, electronic prescriptions, the lot. One system to bring the entire health service into the 21st century. And on paper, it was glorious. Politicians backed it at the highest level. The initial budget was set at somewhere around £6 billion, a vast sum, but for a project this transformative, it seemed almost reasonable. The contracts were enormous, the technology giants lined up to win them, and the whole thing was launched with confidence and fanfare. This was going to be Britain, showing the world how it was done. But beneath the confidence, a fatal flaw had already been built into the foundations. And it was not a technical one. It was about who was being listened to and who was being ignored. Because the entire program was designed from the top down. The decisions about what to build, how it would work, and which companies would build it were made centrally by officials and ministers and management consultants. And the people who would actually have to use this system every single day, the doctors, the nurses, the GPs in their surgeries, were barely consulted at all. Think about how strange that is. You are building a tool for surgeons and family doctors, a tool they will rely on to treat patients, and you do not seriously ask them what they needed to do. The result was entirely predictable to anyone on the ground. From very early on, the doctors who saw the plans raised the alarm.
All the main political parties are promising more money for England's NHS, but it's needed now. Already delays in treatment and staff shortages are at record levels.
They warned that the system did not fit the way medicine actually worked, that it was clumsy, that it did not match the messy reality of treating real patients in real hospitals. They did not trust it, and many of them quietly, decided they were not going to use it. And it was not only the doctors who were uneasy, the public had their own fears, and they were not unreasonable ones. The whole idea rested on gathering the confidential medical history of every patient in the country into one enormous connected system. To many people, that raised an obvious and frightening question. Who exactly would be able to see their most private information, and how safe would it really be? Privacy campaigners warned loudly that the safeguards were not good enough. The program attracted public criticism and even mock awards for its approach to personal data. So now the planners were pushing forward against two walls of resistance at once: the doctors who would have to use it and the patients whose lives it would record. And still the spending continued. But the warnings were not heeded, and this is where the story stops being about a hospital system and starts being about the dangerous arrogance of a plan too big to question. Because the NHS is not one organization, that is the thing the planners fatally misunderstood. It is a sprawling collection of hundreds of hospitals and thousands of clinics, each with its own way of working, its own existing computer systems, its own local quirks, built up over decades. And the program tried to impose a single, identical, one-size-fits-all system on top of all of that variety. It was like trying to make every kitchen in the country cook from the exact same recipe, in the exact same way, with the exact same equipment, whether they were a tiny village cafe or a giant hospital canteen. The reality on the ground was wildly different from place to place, and the rigid central system simply could not bend to fit it. To make it work in any given hospital often required so much costly adjustment that the supposed benefits of one unified system began to disappear.
Last week, Sir Simon Stevens, head of NHS England, put the figure at an extra £8 billion for England's health service, over and above any settlement to cover the pandemic expenses.
And then there was the way the contracts had been handled, which was its own slow-motion disaster. In the rush to get the project moving and show progress, enormous decade-long contracts had been signed with a handful of big technology suppliers before anyone had truly nailed down what exactly was going to be built. Read that again. Because it is the heart of it. They committed to spending billions and locked themselves into long contracts, while the actual details of what they wanted were still vague. It is the equivalent of signing a contract to build a house for a fixed price before you have agreed on how many rooms it has or where it will stand. The consequences were brutal. As the project crawled forward and the true scale of the difficulty became clear, the suppliers struggled. Deadlines were missed by years. The core feature, that single electronic patient record, the whole point of the entire program, proved fiendishly hard to deliver and was delivered late, badly, and to far fewer places than promised. The relationships between the government and its suppliers curdled into disputes and finger-pointing. There was supposed to be protection against exactly this. The contracts had been written so that if a supplier abandoned the project, they would owe huge sums, penalties meant to keep them locked in. In theory, the taxpayer was shielded. In practice, when the giants started heading for the exits, the disputes and settlements that followed were messy, drawn out, and expensive in their own right. The safety net that was supposed to make walking away painful did not save the public from paying, one way or another. And then they began to walk away. One of the giant consulting firms that had won a huge slice of the work pulled out.
Across the UK, hospitals are at breaking point.
We see times when we can't actually get any patients through the door at all.
Having already written off hundreds of millions of dollars because of the delays. Another major supplier saw its contract terminated. The grand alliance of technology titans that was supposed to deliver the future of British healthcare was falling apart piece by piece, contract by contract, while the meter kept running. Hold that running meter in your mind, because the bill was climbing the entire time. Remember the original budget, around £6 billion. As the years dragged on, the delays piled up, and the disputes multiplied, that figure swelled. The estimates climbed past £10 billion. At one alarming point, a parliamentary committee warned that the total could eventually reach as high as £20 billion. By the time the program was finally put out of its misery, the amount of public money that had been poured into it was estimated at somewhere around £10 to £12 billion. Say it slowly, that's 10 zeros, and someone signed off on every single one. But here is the figure that truly stings. After all that money, the government's own assessment later admitted that the program had delivered only a small fraction of that value in actual benefits. By some measures, just a couple of £1 billion worth of useful results out of a spend many times larger. In other words, for every pound that worked, several simply vanished into a project that did not. It was not just expensive, it was expensive and empty. And it is worth pausing on what that wasted money could have been. £12 billion is not an abstract figure. It is real money, taken from a single perpetually stretched health budget. The same budget that pays for cancer drugs, for nurses, for ambulances, for hospital beds. every pound spent chasing a system that did not work was a pound not spent on a patient who needed care.
It sent a signal across Whitehall that was never undone. So today I'm going to reverse it, because I don't see why decisions about £200 billion of taxpayer money.
The true cost of this disaster was never just the number on the page. It was everything that number could have done instead and didn't. And underneath it all, the people steering the project kept changing. Over its long, troubled life, the program passed through different ministers, different officials, different leaders, each inheriting a deeper mess than the last, each trying to salvage something, none able to fix the flaws that had been baked in at the very start. A project meant to run for a decade needs a steady, consistent hand to see it through. Instead, the direction shifted with every change at the top, and the hard-won lessons of one year were forgotten by the next. By now you might be screaming the obvious question: why didn't they just stop? Years in, with the warnings piling up and the suppliers fleeing, why keep feeding billions into something so clearly broken? And the answer is the same trap that swallows almost every great public disaster. Too much had already been spent. Too many careers and reputations were tied to it. To cancel it was to stand up in public and admit that billions of pounds of taxpayer money had bought almost nothing. And no one wanted to be the person who said that out loud. So instead, they kept going, a little longer, a little more money, always hoping the corner was about to be turned. So how does a story like this end? Not with a dramatic explosion, with a quiet, almost embarrassed switching off. In 2011, after nearly a decade of struggle, the government announced that the National Programme for IT, as it had been conceived, was being dismantled. The grand dream of one unified system for the whole NHS was abandoned. Some pieces of it survived. Certain national systems that had been built did work and are still used today, which is worth being fair about. But the central defining ambition, the thing the billions had been spent chasing, was quietly shelved.
Resource is full. I've got red firm going off, so we've got to now make that decision of who do we move out of resource to actually get this poorly patient.
The largest civilian IT project in the world had ended not in triumph, but in a managed retreat. And the people responsible faced remarkably little. There was no single villain to blame, no fraud, no theft. That, in a way, is the most unsettling part. This was not a crime, it was a catastrophe of good intentions, a disaster built entirely out of ambition, overconfidence, and a refusal to listen, with no one person ever truly accountable for the whole of it. So, how did this happen? How did so much money and effort produce so little? The answer is the oldest mistake in the book, and it has nothing to do with technology. It is the belief that a problem can be solved by force from above, without the cooperation of the people on the ground. The planners had a genuinely good goal. Modernising the NHS's ancient record-keeping was, and still is, a worthy aim, but they tried to achieve it by decree, designing a rigid uniform system in offices far from any hospital ward, handing it down to the doctors and nurses below, and assuming they would simply fall into line. They did not. You cannot force a vast, living human system to bend to a blueprint it had no part in drawing. And because the project was so enormous, so expensive, and so loudly promised, admitting it was failing became almost impossible. Each year, the people in charge had a choice: confess that billions had been misspent and stop, or push on, spend a little more, and hope it would somehow come right. Year after year, they chose to push on. The sheer size of the thing became the reason it could not be killed, until there was finally no choice left. The NHS did eventually get better technology, built later, more slowly and crucially, with far more listening to the people who actually use it. But the lesson of the £12 billion disaster still stands, and it reaches far beyond hospitals. The grandest plan in the world is worthless if the people it is built for were never asked what they needed. Ambition on its own is not a strategy. It is just an expensive way to learn that you should have listened.
No sides, no politics, just the receipts. Count the zeros.